So yeah, thank you so much for joining us. I haven't timed this. I wrote this morning. So I'm probably going to go for about half an hour. We'll see how long it goes. But in the meantime, please do put any questions in the chat as we go. I'll either take them as we go if it's related to something that I am directly saying, or if it's not, then I'll save some time for questions at the end. We will also be recording this if for some reason you drop out or your Wi-Fi goes down or whatever, don't worry, we'll do that and we'll send that back. And I think that's all of the general admin. But yeah, I'm here, Tabby's also here. So if you have any questions or any problems at any point, feel free to just drop a message in the chat or DM us privately. And yeah, thank you so much for coming. I was kind of worried it might just be me, but there's loads to say, so that's cool. So yeah, over the next half an hour-ish, I'm going to talk about how to get shortlisted and win journalism awards, talking about the SBA awards in particular. Hopefully you can all see my screen. If not, please do shout. And my name's Jem. So hi, I probably should have started with that. I am the editor and director of a website called Journey Resources, which helps people get into and progress within journalism. We've got tons of tools and resources that you can take a look at if that is something you're interested in. So please do check us out. But the main reason I'm here is because I'm also a trustee for the Student Publication Association and a former chair, seemingly never able to leave. And perhaps more relevant to this, I worked this out today, judging the SPA Awards, or at least shortlisting, for 5 years now, which is terrifying. This will be my 6th. I also judge the Women in Journalism Georgina Henry Awards at the British Journalism Awards, which comes with a £4,000 prize. And hopefully this doesn't sound like myself bigging myself up too much, but I have won a couple of awards myself. The most recent one you can see on my Twitter there was the DBase Award last July, which came with £10,000, which was wild. So hopefully I have some useful things to say to you from being both the person that looks at awards entries and the person who has entered a lot. And yeah, hopefully I can give you some insights both on our awards and anything else that you do go on to kind of enter as you go through your career. And, just to kind of start, I think the main reason that we wanted to do this session, we've talked about wanting to do a session like this for a while, is that we really don't want the SBA Awards to be one of those awards where the same people win every year. So please do, if, we will send a recording out of this later, please do take notes, share them with people. If there's people that you think would find this useful afterwards, if there's questions that you have as we're going through or things that I'm saying that don't make sense, please do ask, because the reason we want to do this is so that as many people as possible can see what we're looking for, so that the people who are doing the best work really do win, no matter where you are around the country or whether you've entered an award before or whatever. So normally when I do these sessions, I have a bit of a structure, but as I wrote this morning, this is kind of just a collection of tips. So I'm just going to go through a load of stuff, and then there'll be time for questions afterwards. So as we go, please do put any questions in the chat. It would also just be lovely if everyone wanted to introduce themselves and where they're from in the chat. That would be just nice as well, so that I can know that I'm not alone. So yeah, please do say who you are in the chat, and please do put any questions as you go. So the thing I guess I wanted to start with, before I go into some more granular advice, is that I would always just kind of frame this by always apply again. So if you are here and you have applied for the SPA Awards before, and perhaps you were disheartened because you didn't get shortlisted, or maybe if you end up in the situation where this year you apply and you don't get shortlisted, always apply again. Like my motto is in life for several awards, is that I will keep applying to something I want to win until I get there, even if it takes me 75 attempts. Like I just keep throwing in applications, and then eventually something will stick. So the DBase Awards, which I mentioned earlier, which was the bonkers one, which came with a ton of money for the business, that was my second attempt. I didn't even get shortlisted the first time round. The same for the Georgina Henry Award that I won, the NCJ Award, anything. I think everything I've ever won has been on the second or third attempt. And there is one award that I'm really desperate that I want to get to the final 4 for Freelancer of the Year. I've been shortlisted 4 times now. People keep being like, are you going to give up? I'm like, no, I'm just going to keep going. So I guess what I'm saying is, please don't be put off if you have tried to enter something in the past, it hasn't worked out, or even if that doesn't happen next year. Even if that does happen this year, do use that as a learning experience to help you build and kind of do better next time. And I guess kind of what comes with that, following on from that, is everything I ever enter, this goes for both award applications and job applications, is I always keep a copy of everything I ever send in. So don't just write them directly into the form. This might sound like boring admin, but don't just write it directly in the form. Do it in a Google form, Google Doc first, and then you can kind of copy and paste it in. If you're entering for yourself, keep that for you personally. And I just have like a Google Drive where I have everything I've ever sent off in it. If you are entering on behalf of your publication, I'd also really encourage you to do that and set that up for your publication as well. So things like best publication, best sports section, all of those kind of things. Set that up so you know what the people last year set up and the people next year will know what you sent. I note down with it whether I got rejected, shortlisted, or won, and any kind of feedback that I got. Often you won't get any kind of feedback for these kind of things. If you're not shortlisted, we at the SBA get over 1,000 entries a year. It would be impossible, we're all volunteers, to give every single person feedback, but you really would be surprised at what feedback you can give yourself once you've had like the hindsight of a year. If you kind of literally just chuck it into a document, basically forget about it until applications begin to start opening in a year's time, and you've noted down whether you were rejected, shortlisted, or won, actually it will give you a lot more information than you think to actually improve that application and make it better. So yeah, do that for yourself, and do think about how you can set that up and pass that on to the next team at your publication as well. So to give you a bit of an example of this, this is for a different set of awards, but these are two excerpts of the D-Base Awards which I applied for, which I won last year and had applied for several times before. So I will send these, but don't read too much into it because this is obviously a different set of awards. But what you can hopefully see from it is that this is exactly the same question in the awards application, but I answered it in very different ways. In the first year, they said, why are you applying for this award and how will it benefit you? And I basically was like, I know everything. I know exactly what I need to do. Please just give me some money. Whereas the next one, I actually talked about the business support I needed, what I wanted to do to learn and grow. And that was the one that won. And the reason I changed that is because basically my process here was to go back to the old application a year later. I read it all the way through, and then I looked at the resources the competition had put out on their website and basically wrote my own feedback notes on what I could have done better. So I didn't have any feedback from judges. None of them had said to me, oh, this was really great, but, or you want to change this, but. I basically just went, actually, there's been enough time now. I can go and look back at what I've done before and give myself some notes and change it. And the main thing I noticed from reading their resources is they didn't want people who just wanted a load of money. They wanted people who wanted to learn. So I changed it. And then I got shortlisted and got to the final. So I really would kind of advise that process. Even if you don't have something to read from last year, there are tons of resources that I would definitely recommend that you read, both SPA wise and if you're applying for any other awards. Most good awards that care about diversity will put some of this stuff out. So for the SPA awards in particular, things I would recommend reading. So some of these will be updated this year, but you can always find all of the past versions as well. We have them on our website. Maybe it's a little bit difficult to search for, but I will kind of collate them and send it out to everyone who's been to this workshop. Every year we have an awards guide. The awards guide not only runs through the criteria that we set for each award, which is definitely worth looking at. There are also some particular tips and things to think about for each category. I would also look up who won last year in the category that you are entering and see if you can find their stories or look at their website, kind of see exactly what it is that they won for. And you might also be able to see some past winners entries. Sometimes I manage to pull those together. I will try and do that this year so you can actually see what the winners entries actually looked like. But if not, there are still some, again, on the SBA website. We definitely have some dotted around through the years, which I'll send out. And also obviously going to this workshop. This probably sounds like the most basic thing ever, where I'm like, hey, you're at this workshop and have a look at some past winners stories, some past winners entries, look at the awards guide. Generally though, this is the thing that has made the most benefit to me when I've been applying for awards, and it's the thing that I would say 90% of people clearly don't do. It's super hard, right? We would tend to like leave stuff to the last minute. I know I do. But if you can actually earmark the time to do these things, and it will give you a real sense of what things should look like, what judges are typically looking for. And yeah, 90% of people don't do this. So if you're able to spend a bit of time, even just looking at these things, and even if you then end up writing your entry, like, with half an hour to go, you'll still have had in the back of your mind a bit of an idea of what will make it good and what the judges are looking for. I think when I entered the DBASE award last year, I spent about 40 hours on it, which is ridiculous. Don't do that. But I definitely would say spend 1 or 2 hours looking through some of these things, because they will give you a much better idea of what you should be looking for. Yeah, I have put don't leave it till the last minute. I was tempted. I was telling my partner about the session and they were like, maybe you should put this as every other slide because it's the thing everyone does. And everyone still does. It's the most obvious thing. But honestly, the site could crash at 11:58. That has happened before. We've all been there. And I've also, when I've gone back and looked at previous applications I've done and things that I've thought, I've actually been like, oh, I did a really good job at that, considering I put it in at like 11:58. And then I look at it a year later and I'm like, oh my God, I could have made that so much better. That's clearly why I didn't get shortlisted. So if you can, do try and get them done early, or at least do that reading, or at least have an outline, or get as much as you can done early, because they really do take longer than you think. So try not to leave it to the last minute if you possibly can. Again, sounds obvious. I'm sure everyone says this, but really does make a difference when I'm the person looking through it. I can tell, even without looking at the timestamp, who's put it in where. Also, if you get it in early, and again, this perhaps seems like another really obvious thing, but if you get it done early, you have the time for someone to proofread it. When I'm applying, the things I'm really passionate about, I tend to get 2 people to proofread it. I would recommend getting one person who knows the project or website or story really well, and so they can point out things that you might have forgotten to mention because they know it quite intricately, and they're like, oh, you didn't mention that you did this. But also getting someone who knows absolutely nothing about it to read it, who maybe isn't anything to do with student journalism. I quite frequently get my mum to read my journalism awards applications, because she knows I don't think my parents could describe what I do, and that's also really useful, because I think sometimes when you're so invested in a publication, an organization, a story, I think often we can take things for granted and assume that something is really, really obvious about the award that you're applying for, and then a judge might not know that, they might not see that, they come from a different area of an industry, they might not know about all the hours you put into X or the thing you did here, or it's just not been made clear. So proof it with 2 people, someone else in your team who really understands. Find a housemate, find someone who knows nothing about student journalism or what you're doing, and ask them if there is anything in particular in that supporting statement which isn't obvious that really they think you should mention. And I always get those 2 kinds of people to do it. Cool. And the other thing, the other benefit of doing something early, and then I'll shut up and give some actual kind of what to write tips, is that if you know what the criteria is really early on, i.e. now, you can actually write things that fit the brief. So maybe this is a bit controversial, maybe my colleagues would agree, but if you're looking at the criteria really early and you know that we prefer it, for example, if you went to an actual gig for a review piece, you could actually just go and do that. For example, there's a bit of funding I applied for several years ago from the Solutions Journalism Network, and at a certain stage in the process, they were like, oh, have you ever written any solutions journalism? No worries if not, won't affect your application, but if you have, can you send it in? And I was like, I'm just going to go away and write some and send it in. And then we got the funding. But all of the criteria we set for the SPA Awards are around what I think we as a team genuinely believe makes good student journalism and makes it like the best it can possibly be for its audience. So I don't think there is any problem with looking through the criteria, which we believe is the criteria for really good students journalism. Not to say that there are not great things that could be made or done outside of that, but looking at it and going, okay, what could I write within that kind of realm of piece? So don't be afraid to use that criteria as inspiration for like, what is the story I've always wanted to write, or actually like I was going to go and do this, but actually having looked at the other pieces, maybe I could approach it in a different way. So you have tons of time like from now to when the awards close. So actually, if you want to go away and have a look at all that stuff, you totally can do that. And maybe it's that you approach a story in a different way with the awards in mind. Cool. And then I had a couple of bits around when it actually comes to applying, and some questions I typically tend to look out for, as well as some bugbears. So the first one that I would say that you ask yourself about any publication or any story that you want to submit for these awards in particular is it relevant to students? And I think it's really important for us at the SBA Awards that we feel like you understand your place in the media landscape, so that you understand that you're not trying to be a national newspaper or Stylist or the non-league paper or whatever it is. You are being a student paper who really understands who you're trying to serve. So you're trying to be a source of news, features, entertainment, reviews, whatever it is for the students on your campus. So I'm looking for stories that reflect that. And like, obviously, sometimes you will cover very similar things, but you will probably to some of those outlets. But we would probably expect you to have like a slightly different way, like a different slant or way of doing it than Stylist would, or a different way of doing it than your local paper would, because you're specifically focused on students in your campus and what they care about. Typically, I always favour stories which are highly relevant to the students on your campus over ones which are maybe kind of, say, big national stories, which maybe you are just following up on or weren't involved in the production on. So really just think about like your specific audience and what's really relevant to them, because it's actually about understanding who you serve, if that makes sense. The next question is maybe a little bit similar. And asking yourself, like, is it original journalism? But I, again, always really favour people who have gone out and done something themselves, whatever that is. Like, you've gone and done something and you've gone and done some journalism. And I think this is like a super common, not mistake, I wouldn't necessarily call it that, but I think sometimes we can go, okay, you know, the story about, I don't know, Liz Truss and whatever, like massive catastrophe she's been involved in lately is maybe the biggest national story of the day. But actually, you know, if you're just rewriting that national story, you know, that to me isn't as strong as something you found yourself and actually done the legwork on, even if it's something that would never grace the pages of a national newspaper. I would much rather you would find something that you have found rather than kind of literally just rewrite something. And you might have written it well and you might have changed it to have a bit more of a student angle, but I would always favour the original story, even if it's a little smaller. Sometimes it might be the case that you found a local angle on something and you've moved it on with your own work, and that's super, and that is really valid. And some cases they're done really well, but generally I think I'd always try and think about the stories that you can do that are completely original. Like, generally I'd much rather like the, I don't know, the expose about, we had a great story from Exeter a couple of years ago about like people in the bar being made redundant and the union doing some really kind of dodgy stuff around prices and sacking people and the work experience there being toxic. And I think that's a much like stronger story for your audience that they wouldn't necessarily get elsewhere. And I would say this goes across like all categories as well. So I would rather see, if it was a review, I'd rather see, for example, that you went to a gig that was local to you so that you can talk about the atmosphere in the crowd. And it's something that students at your campus could actually access rather than it just being something you listen to on Spotify. Similarly for comment, this is maybe a big one for me, I would pick something that is specific to your audience and that you have expertise on. I think with very few exceptions, of which there are exceptions, and I've seen some amazing ones where people do have that expertise, I would genuinely say hardly any of us have expertise on foreign policy or even national politics. What you do have is expertise on your campus and policies that will affect you. And so for the most part, those two things are the things that I would actually like to see in the kind of comment category. So really think about, do you have expertise in the area? Will your students, will your audience find it relevant? And is it original journalism? Basically in every category. Even, you know, sometimes there is in comment, you know, maybe you have a strong enough personal story or analysis that you don't need to speak to anyone else. But generally, I would say that I expect there to be some quotes in basically any piece that you put in. And then finally, in terms of tips when you're writing it on this slide, think about what makes your entry or story like different. we get over 1,000 entries every year, typically about 1,200 entries, which is like a hell of a lot. So I don't want to say that's like a scary number, but actually, like, no, hardly, I don't think many people think about how, you know, how is this story different to other people that have entered this. So for example, it was either last year or the year before, we had tons of super important stories about needle spiking, and absolutely something you should be covering, because if that's something your student base is worried about, you should be covering that, doing it well. But because it became a national conversation, every publication put in a story about that. Doesn't mean it's not important, but something like this happens every year with whatever the main themes of that year is. There will always be kind of like one story. You know, one year it was like the terrible misogynistic group chats that were happening at some unis. Whatever that kind of big story is, there will be one big student story that kind of becomes, you know, a national conversation. And that means there'll probably be like 20, 30 other publications putting in a story on a similar topic. So actually, you then need to think, like, if this story is part of a bigger national conversation, what makes my story different? Like, did you do it first? Did you get some exclusive data or some hard to get interviews? You know, did you find some data around it? Did it inspire some kind of policy change or something to happen at your university? So just really think about, like, you know, if other people are going to have done a similar story, why is mine different? Why is mine better than everyone else's? And you definitely have the answers to that. You've probably done something and approached it in a slightly different way, but you need it to make it really easy for me when I'm kind of scrolling through 20 of them to go, okay, this is the one out of 20 where someone's done something and approached this slightly different and made it unique to their publication. And equally, this is also the reason why I would also suggest thinking about what stories you have done, would like to do over the next couple of months that are really unique to your publication. So not necessarily, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be that the big stories that you put in have to be part of a national conversation. Sometimes the best ones that we see in, like, you know, best feature, best news story are ones where I'm like, oh my God, I'd never thought of that, you know, and it's really unique and it's really original. So don't think that you only have to put in the ones that's been covered in lots of other places. But if you do, make sure you're thinking about why they're different. That also applies when you're putting in the publication entries as well. So really thinking about what makes your publication and entries different. I read so many entries for best publication, for example, where they spend most of the time literally just saying, hi, we are X student paper at this university, we have this many sections and this many people writing for us. And I'm like, that's great, guys, but everyone has sections and a team of people writing for them. Like, if someone's going through like 20 applications, actually the first thing I want to read is, again, what makes your team different? Do you have sections other places don't have? You know, what successes have you had this year? How have you grown? And to me, I think that's more interesting than giving a generic overview. So really telling me why your team is different and what you've done, and almost treating it a little bit like when I advise people to do a cover letter, I always say it's better to focus in on, say, like 2 or 3 examples of, like, really tangible examples of things you've done, and talk about them, and then kind of give a little bit of context around that as to why that's just one example of the great things that you've done. But I'd really kind of take that mindset forward, rather than just giving a really general overview of, you know, here's the practicalities if we do. Actually talk about successes, impacts, things that are unique, things that you've changed, things that you might have done differently this year, that you think other places might not have done. This maybe leads on to the next one. You can tell I've not done this before, otherwise I would have done that a lot more smoothly. But yeah, thinking about what impact have you made, I think it's always a really good one, and that's what sets a story or publication apart for me a lot of the time. It's thinking about what impact did this story have, or what impact does my publication have. It doesn't have to be anything huge, but it's just, you know, thinking about the next step other than I wrote a story and I published it. So just showing you've had a little bit of thought about what the story did when you put it out there. So, you know, did it lead to a petition being set up? Did, you know, something happen and change as a result of the story? Like, was this the most read piece of the year? Like, did more people start to read you? Like, it can be qualitative or quantitative depending on the story, but just think about what journalism inspired or what changes you made this year and what impact that had. And again, it doesn't have to be big numbers, doesn't even have to be numbers, but just thinking about like, what was the impact and what did my journalism or my publication do is something that gets missed so often, and I think is such an important thing to think about in those entries, and typically tends to appear on a lot of the ones that are shortlisted. The other thing I would say about the personal statement bit at the beginning, that comes with every award, I think pretty much all of them has a personal statement bit. Use that to tell me things I might not know about the story. I'm going to read the story anyway, so you don't waste that time in the personal statement necessarily just explaining what the story is, because I've already got that right. I'm going to read the story. Tell me things that I might not know that make the story even more impressive. So was your interviewee really hard to track down? Like, did you do some FOIs to get that data yourself? Like, was the university press office an absolute fucking nightmare? Like, was it the most read story of the year? Like, whatever it was, tell me all those things, because I wouldn't have any way to know otherwise. So really use that personal like statement space to talk about the impact one, but also just all of the things you did when you were doing that story that made it more tricky to actually get it out, or you redesigned the Instagram page and you relaunched it, or you put the TikTok out or whatever, but why hadn't this been done before? Was your student union saying, oh, you couldn't do this, or whatever it was? Tell me all of those things, and then I can kind of take that into account and go, oh, that is really impressive, you've done that. This person has maybe never done an interview before, or whatever it is. And then maybe unlike this presentation, which maybe hasn't been the most concise, but I would really, really urge you to keep it simple, keep it concise. I've got a slide coming up in a sec about how the process I actually use when I judge entries, which will maybe give this a bit more context. But I would really, really urge you to keep what you're writing clear and concise, like it's not an essay. But like the fact is we have thousands of these. I know I've said this several times. We have thousands of these. It's better now that we've got a bigger team, but there have been times when I've like gone to bed at 6 a.m. after starting at 6 p.m. and it's ridiculous. And as much as I love it, I hate it. So you have to make it really easy for me to see why your story is good. So, in that personal statement, you don't want there to be like a drop intro. You don't want to like lead up into it. You need to almost like think of it like a straight news story in itself, where you're putting like the most impressive bit first. You just want to make it super easy that someone who's tired, who is looking through their like 50th one in this section, can go, oh yeah, that looks good. So keep it simple, like make sure you're really focused on telling the important bits and keep it quite tight. Like it doesn't want to feel like waffly or long or anything like that. That bit about what the most impressive thing is, what's the standout thing, that's what you want to be at the top. It's maybe similar to, so I have a rule with like a rule, or maybe some advice, I guess, when I chat to people about job applications, about CVs and cover letters, is I always say, like, when you're applying for jobs, you should be able to cover up the bottom 2/3 of the application of either the CV or cover letter. And there should be enough in the top third for someone to be interested enough to want to come and have a chat to you. And I think what I would say the relevance to that is here is someone should be able to cover up the bottom 2/3 of your personal statement, or the bottom 2/3 of your actual story, or whatever it is. If it's the best publication where you get to just put like a page in of all the great things you've done, you should be able to cover up the bottom 2/3, and there should still be enough that someone's like, that's super cool, like I like that. So really put the good stuff at the top. Obviously you want it to all be good, but really think about how you like hit someone in the face, like in the first bit. And the same goes for designs. Like we see some great designs every year where people have designed stuff and they look really great. But if you are, just be mindful that if you have got a format and a way of designing it, make sure it's clear and easy to read. I'd say 90% of the ones like we get like are, but then sometimes I think people forget, they're like, oh, only this look great if I design it and make it look pretty. But if it looks pretty but I can't read it, like that is not helpful at all. So yeah, feel free to design it. That is great. It can help it give a level of professionalism, but you absolutely don't need to do that. If actually you just want to write, like if you feel like you're not part of the team that lays stuff out on the paper, like that's fine. You don't need, like, you don't have to make anything funky, as long as it's just there and clear to read. that's all fine. So on that, before I've got maybe, I think, 2 more slides. So on that, I wanted to talk a little bit about my method of like how I judge things, which will maybe put some of that stuff into context. And my method, which I think is fairly similar to most of the people who shortlist with me, is that you and the person you're paired up with get given a Google Drive link, and there's like 200 entries in it, and you're like, oh my God, what have I done? Why did I agree to do this for year 6 in a row? And then I do what I would call like a first sweep or a first pass, which is literally where we will just scan everything, every single one, to see if it's anything mildly interesting, and if not, it goes into the bin straight away. Some people sometimes might not even read the whole thing before it goes into the bin pile, and that sounds really harsh, but that is just what you have to do if you've got 1,000 entries to look through. And again, I don't tell you this for you to be like, oh my God, this is terrifying, but like, I actually think that it's a lot easier if you do all the things that I've mentioned. Like, I'd say like 50 to 60% of people don't do that, so it's a lot easier to not get put in the bin pile. But I think your job actually is, like, for the first part, is to go like, okay, what things do I need to do so this is interesting enough in that first third that it doesn't get put in the bin pile? Because once we've done that, we then go back and go, okay, here's the half that are left, and we have a real conversation about them. So yeah, it's really isn't that hard to avoid being in the pile that gets like put to the side straight away, if you've done all the things that I said above. So you've made it clear and easy for me to see why it's a good original piece of work that's tailored to your audience. You've done some original journalism and told me about the impact that it's made. And then, yeah, after that, we tend to like discuss the nuances of each story. So I think maybe just use that as like an example of like why it needs to be really clear. There people who are shortlisting are very time poor. They have so like many to look through. So just make it really easy in that top bit for them to go, yeah, that's interesting. I want to chat about that when we go through and talk about all the ones I think are interesting. And most people don't do that. So if you do all of those things, you're already ahead of a lot of people. And then my final slide before if you have any questions, I can take any questions. So feel free to put any in the chat if you have any. But yeah, my final points that I had were, when you're writing stuff, only anonymous quotes if they really need to be. I think sometimes as student journalists, we can maybe worry too much when someone goes, oh, I don't know if I want to be quoted, but like, yeah, that's fine. But you know, if someone is just commenting on the price of something having gone up, or if they're talking about, you know, student union candidates, whatever it is, they don't need to be anonymous. Like, and it kind of weakens your piece. Like, there should be a reason for someone to be anonymous, and you should be able to kind of articulate that. So only have anonymous quotes in your piece if there is a real justification for that, not just because someone's gone, oh, I don't necessarily want my name in the paper, try and find someone else. I would always ask yourself, is a listicle really the right format for it? Sometimes it is. You know, I've seen some really good examples of this, but I would say 90% of the time, you know, especially for the best, maybe this is really mean, I don't know, but for the best feature category, I'm always like, is a listicle going to be the best written feature in the country? So really just think about the format, I guess, of your piece, and think like, is this the best way to display all this amazing work that I've done? Sometimes it absolutely can be, but I would say maybe 80% of the time it isn't. And then the final thing I would say before I shut up and stop talking, is do let your interviewees speak in pieces as well. Quite often I will see people who will kind of like, who've obviously done some great work and have spoken to a load of people, but then they will kind of paraphrase what the interviewee has said rather than let them say it in their own words. Whereas actually, I really do want to see the quotes that the interviewee has given to you, and not, you know, you don't need to, you don't need to write that over. Their voices are, give them space within your words. And then the final thing is just to say, yeah, you definitely can do it. All of the stuff I have mentioned and said here, lots of people don't do. So, yeah, if you kind of take that all on board, you have a very strong chance of putting them, of getting into the shortlist. That was kind of all I had to say, which was roughly 36 minutes. So I think I timed that quite well. Did anyone have any questions? I know that it's like 6:30 on a Friday. But I'm happy to hang around for a little bit if anyone does. Feel free to just unmute yourself if you would like. Or you can put them in the chat.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
You know when the timings are likely to be? I understand if you can't say, but our election cycle last year, like for the exec elections, was the exact same week as the SPA submissions, and it was very stressful. So we're trying to plan earlier to make sure that that doesn't happen again. But obviously, if
that is a good question. I think we're still finalising it. The one thing I would say is we do have to leave them open for a month, so we'll try and get that out as soon as possible. I think it's a month. Is that right, Tabby? Maybe. So we are basically just about to put tickets on sale for the actual conference, and as basically I think at the same time we do that, we'll be able to release the timeline for everything else. But we do leave them open we will leave it open for 4 weeks. So I would say, yeah, hopefully one of those 4 weeks works for you.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
There's a couple in the chat, so I will go to those. Yeah, the recording, I will cut it up over the weekend and we'll probably send it out via email. I'll also pop it in the Discord. So yeah, we will send it out to email to everyone who has signed up for a ticket to this. We'll upload it onto YouTube and then you can share it with whoever you like. And then we will also send an email out to all SBA members, and I'll write some kind of general notes and stuff as well. Okay, so one of the questions in the chat says, it's often said that investigations do better in the best news category. Do you think this is true? I guess the merit that an investigation has is you've clearly done a lot of work to get into it. You like by nature of an investigation, you've probably spoke to a lot of people and done a bit of like digging. So it does come across as a very good news story, but I don't necessarily think it has to be necessarily an investigation. We had some great, I think maybe, was it last year or the year before? I can't really remember, but there was a story, a couple of stories that we definitely shortlisted last year because we did best news last year, which weren't necessarily investigations. They were things that just weren't great that had happened. I think one was from the Mancunian. It was it was some kind of opportunities fair wasn't accessible. People who are wheelchair users couldn't access it, for example, and I think that's a really strong and valid news story. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, in my opinion, like a massive investigation, but it does have to be something that you've found that's original and you've kind of got all of the constituent parts. So if it is a news story, just ask yourself, like, what are the key parts of this story that I want to tell, if that makes sense. So like if it's that this opportunities fair isn't accessible, you probably want to hear from the people who weren't able to access it. You want to hear from the organizers. You want to hear from some people who maybe had some stalls and were a bit, I don't know, annoyed that it wasn't as accessible as they were told it was going to be. So just really think about yeah, all of the parts of that news story. It doesn't have to be an investigation, but again, I would probably say that's the best place for an investigation to go. I don't know if that's not, did that answer the question? Cool. Yeah. Awesome. And then, okay, best features and best interview tend to overlap a lot. How would you distinguish these categories? Yeah, that is a good question. I would say this is maybe wider advice than just this, and not potentially the most helpful in this instance, because both of these are very popular categories, but sometimes it is worth thinking about which categories might get the most entries and which might be less popular. If you've got something that overlaps between two categories, maybe you want to kind of go for the one that you think might be less popular. But I think in general, between best features and best interview, I would say best feature is probably slightly broader to me than just chatting with one person or one group. So I would say a feature probably tackles a wider issue or a wider topic. So it might be, trying to think of an example. If you're talking about, I don't know, food insecurity, on campus. A feature would really kind of delve into the problem and speak to a couple of different groups or types of people who have insights on that, whereas an interview might be you are just interviewing, you are perhaps interviewing, say, like the person that runs the food bank on campus, or the person who set up a specific initiative. So I would say that feature is probably examining a bigger or wider topic and speaks to a range of people, where I would say best interview is really focused on one person or one group. If, say, you are interviewing the founders of a particular campaign or a band or something, and you are exploring them as a person and their motivation and what they're doing, if that makes sense. Cool. Did anyone else have any other questions? Otherwise, I will leave you to your evenings. But I am also, so I'll pop my, I'm a bit bad on my SPA email because we will only do this part-time, volunteer. But I'll put my email in the chat, and if anyone does have any other questions, please do just send me an email, and I can kind of also put them to some of our fellow trustees who've been doing this for equally long as I have, and we can maybe send those out with the video when we put it out, so feel free to pop that on there. But yeah, if no one else has any other questions, we will definitely send you this out. I hope it was somewhat useful. I feel like I've just talked for 45 minutes. But yeah, feel free to reach out with questions. We'll send this out. We will also redo a load of those things here. So the awards guide, past stories, I'll try and find some past winners entries that we can send to you guys so you can look through them all. And yeah, I think that's broadly anything. Tabby, is there anything else we should announce while we have people here?
I don't think so. Obviously regional awards will come out fairly soon, but other than that, no.
Awesome. Well, cool. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. I hope it was useful. We'll write stuff and send it to you, and have a lovely weekend, and see you in Glasgow, hopefully.